Hi, and welcome to the Queer SFF panel, the favorite Queer SFF panel. I'm Julia Rios, and I'm going to be moderating. My pronouns that you can use for this panel are they, them. And if you have questions or other recommendations to share, drop them into the Discord. We're in Scioto Room Odd, and we will be taking audience questions and recommendations throughout the panel. I'd like to start by having my fellow panelists, who are all awesome queer SFF readers, to introduce themselves, give their pronouns that we should use for them for this panel, and also tell us a little bit about their connection to queer SFF. And I will start with Charles.
Hi, I'm Charles Pessour, pronouns he, him. I'm a reader, writer, and reviewer of speculative fiction. I run Quick Reviews, which is a short fiction and poetry review site, and just sort of I'm rather engaged in reading, reviewing, writing queer SFF. It's just sort of my favorite thing. So it's what I gravitate toward and what I tend to enjoy the most.
Awesome. And you said your pronouns are he, him, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I just had a blip where I couldn't remember. Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Locke. I am a reader and writer of speculative fiction, and I am also a young adult librarian in real life. My pronouns are she and her, and I actually, technically, I think I'm also a reviewer. Yeah, I keep forgetting that. Lots of hats.
So what I'm hearing is you should have lots of good recommendations for us. And Valerie.
Hey, I'm Valerie Estelle Frankel, she, her. I love YA fantasy, so I've been reading a lot, and it has lately been diversifying itself a lot in a lot of directions. Although I've got some recommendations from the 70s and the 90s and so forth too, but lately there's been so much. And I write analysis of TV shows, movies, really popular franchises, and again, recently, Orphan Black, Orange is the New Black, She-Ra, Steven Universe, Discovery. Yeah, there's lots to write about.
Okay. So this is going to be a fun panel. I'm going to stay away from all the questions about what we don't like to see and only stick with positivity. We're going to explore, this is called Favorite Queer SF. We're going to explore all the things that we love. So I'd like to start by going back in time to when you were younger. What's the first queer SFF that you remember loving as a younger person? I'm going to start with Sarah.
So I grew up in I grew up in a conservative Christian cult, and I was not technically allowed to read anything fantasy. Sci-fi was questionable. But my first that I remember was the various Mercedes Lackey Valdemar series.
What did you love about those?
Like at the time, I did not even realize that I myself was not straight, that compulsory heteronormativity is a super thing. But at the time, I loved the matter of factness of it, I think, because like I didn't get a lot of direct homophobia, but it was mostly an erasure and an ignorance. And so just seeing those relationships on the page as another facet of human existence, and just it was just very, very helpful to me in broadening my horizons.
Okay. What about you, Valerie?
Same answer. I guess the popularity of the series and the decade it came out and whatever, it was just around. But yeah, Mercedes Lackey was gorgeous. I was going to say Vaniel, but which is the gay kid trilogy, the second one. But now that I think about it, in her first book, the the gay side character goes to the central heroine and says, "You're from a really conservative background. You okay with this?" And she says, "Oh, you mean like special friends, because I come from a community where the husband has like 6 wives who have no choice in it." And of course, that's how human beings work.
What about you, Charles?
Well, I have similar experiences in that I really wasn't exposed to it very early, and I wasn't like out myself for a long time, and through books was sort of like how I started to figure that out. But it wasn't until like after college. When I was younger, there were a few that I can remember as being like, oh, that's probably the first time I noticed it, I think, and not necessarily in the greatest of ways. I think the first one I remember is Tigana. There's a few characters in that book. The most prominent one is like killed right away, but that's like the first time I noticed it. Like when I was getting to the point where I was starting to find more out about it. There's like uh, The Summer Prince by Elia Dawn Johnson was very sort of like important to me when I was starting to get more into queer SFF. The I forget the titles now. The duology by N.K. Jemisin, where there's like psychic ninjas. Which the Dream Blood duology, I believe that one is. It's like that one's also like, that was early in my reading of like getting into queer stuff and starting to figure myself out. I think those ones were fairly like, yes, I liked those a lot.
Great. And for me, I also, I wasn't forbidden from reading anything, but I definitely grew up in an area that was very conservative, and I was very closeted and not at all thinking that it was okay to be gay in any way. And so for me, I remember reading a lot of things and sort of like not noticing or glossing over them. And then later when I looked back was like, oh, this is why I loved this particular thing. Um, so I think things like Sherwood Smith's stories, she has a lot of stories with incidental gay characters where it's just accepted. And I loved those. I loved Patricia C. Reedy's Enchanted Forest Chronicles, where the whole premise of that is a princess goes and lives with dragons instead of marrying a prince. And like, I think eventually she marries a prince, but for the first two books, at least, she's just like living with dragons. And I was about that. I was like, yes, this is, what if you just reject everything and go live with dragons? This sounds great. So I think it's interesting to see how things can kind of enter into the queer affirming space without necessarily even having explicit queer relationships. But I would love to talk about some of the classic examples of things. And I know that one of the things that I remember reading when I was young was Ursula Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness. And I think I read that since I was older, and I feel like it does have issues. It's not completely unproblematic, but also it opened my eyes to different ways of potentially being and treating relationships as not necessarily having to be between rigid binary genders. Were there any things like that that helped you at different points? And if so, what were they and why? And I will start with Valerie.
Figures, the one I don't have a perfect answer for. Helped me at particular points. Nothing's particularly coming to mind because for me, my reading tends to be very escapist, just is. But I was just reading Joanna Russ is the Female Man, as the men are telling this all-female society, we're going to come and make your society right the way it's supposed to be. And the spokeswoman is going, what? I'm happy. We're all happy. We're all living a great life here. You want us to inject what in our society? And this is supposed to be better? No.
Yeah, and I think that's another really good example because I feel like in her lifetime, Joanna Russ had some pushback about being transphobic and actually agreed and changed her mind on some of the things that she had written in that over the course of her lifetime, which people can change. And I think all of us are learning as we go. So it's entirely possible that we write things when we're younger and revisit when we're older. I know Ursula Le Guin did that with the Earthsea trilogy as well. Charles, what about you? Do you have any examples of things that helped you at a specific point in time? I know you mentioned Elia Dawn Johnson's The Summer Prince. Do you want to talk a little bit about why that was important to you?
Well, I mean, you get into certain things where, as sort of a bisexual reader, these things where you don't necessarily see an awful lot of it. I mean, You do, kind of. I mean, you go back to The Dispossessed was also rather important to me. I think that for Ursula K. Le Guin was the more important queer text than The Left Hand of Darkness, because it sort of posits this bisexual utopia on the moon, essentially, which was like really great. Like the casual way that it was just sort of like, oh yeah, the idea of possessive love is not the same there. Everyone sort of like goes back and forth with partners, and it doesn't really matter, what their bodies are like and that sort of thing. And I was like, wow, I appreciate that coming as someone well after it was written to that and finding it. The Summer Prince was just like one of these first things where I'm like, this really messy bisexual love triad thing that I had never seen before, and really sort of opened my eyes a lot as to what was possible with fiction and what was going on with that. I mean, I would point to the short fiction works of Sam J. Miller as very important to me too, sort of like in that sphere, finding it as a short fiction reader fairly early when I was starting to get onto the scene as well. It was like, eye-opening. And then you find other writers who are really like putting things out there that were just like really interesting. There, Nino Cipri had a time travel story at Tor that was like really interesting and like really got stuff that I hadn't seen before. And that's sort of like where I come from. The touchstone texts for me a lot of the times are not like big works. They're sort of like obscure short fiction, but I do feel like a lot of the heavy lifting of queer SFF happens at that level and then sort of works its way up.
Yeah, and I think that short fiction can be really meaningful to people and can really have a lot of different ideas that it explores, and sometimes can explore ideas that people haven't had the space to explore in novels, which is funny to say because novels are so much longer. But I think with a short story, you have the room to just be as experimental as you want. So Sarah, can you think of any particular stories that spoke to you at a specific time, and what were they and why?
Yeah. So speaking of things that are not entirely unproblematic, weirdly enough, I think that probably one of the earliest ones that I can think of, well, two, are Stranger in a Strange Land and Time Enough for Love by Heinlein. Because, like, for all their faults, and we could spend probably multiple panels on that, but like just the joyousness of being open with who and how you love. And The Moon is a Harsh Mistress too. Like, especially as a polyamorous person, like just being like like Charles was talking about, like having my mind like blown open to just all these different possibilities. And like, yeah, that was those, and the Callahan books by Spider Robinson, just like really that yeah, like that openness and that joyousness and that acceptance of who and what you love were really just like incredibly formative as I started transitioning out of like the strict monogamous heteronormative binary ideas I'd grown up with.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to take a break and read some of the audience comments because we got some pouring in. What were people's first gay genre books? Someone says Anne Rice's vampire novels. I feel like I definitely read those as a teenager as well. And I think I tried to convince myself they weren't gay. So, so that tells you something about where I was as a teenager. Mercedes Lackey gets some love. Her Hawk brothers were quite explicit and used as euphemism for other countries in her universe. Someone says, I only realized the subtext later, but a friend of mine got Bruce Coville to confirm that Snout and Gracker in the Aliens Ate My Homework series were definitely a couple. So that's probably my first, even if I didn't grok it at the time. And I loved those books as a kid, and I agree. I didn't necessarily notice it at the time, but kudos to Bruce Coville for normalizing that. I remember he wrote another book that I remember seeing and thinking like, wow, this is cool, where explicitly it was about a magic skull that the young boy had, and his uncle was gay, and his uncle was just gay, and the boy was like having trouble accepting that, but like for me as a person who was closeted, that was a really interesting thing to read. Pretty much anything by Tanya Huff, both SF and fantasy, will include LGB relationships, both foreground and background, and I don't think that was ever regarded as anything but normal within the universe. So then another person backs that up, and Sarah says that she loves Tanya Huff's stuff. So Sarah, do you want to talk a little bit about why you love Tanya Huff?
She's just like an incredible writer. Like I have at some point owned or read, I think, everything that's been published that's still in print. I really love the Summon the Keeper series because of its incredible like banter and humor. She's one of my biggest influences when it comes to writing dialogue, actually, because like I could gush forever, but I really, I love, especially in the sci-fi series that she does, it's really rare to see that kind of diversity in military sci-fi, and she does it so well, and there is such a just such a wide range of alien gender identification and sexuality, and also within the humans as well, that it just like it really is a breath of fresh air.
And now that we've moved along in American culture such that now it's legal for people to get married regardless of whether they are one man and one woman as defined by birth certificates. And it's also more mainstream to accept homosexual relationships or non-binary relationships or all sorts of things like that. We're seeing it more in mainstream movies and mainstream TV and of course books. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what is out there right now. What are you seeing that you love and what do you want to see more of? And I think I'm going to start with Valerie there because I know you're reading voraciously a lot of the mainstream, especially YA books.
Yeah, the answer has to be like hundreds, doesn't it? Possibly you were asking about books, but She-Ra, the recent remake, I was really impressed because their team, well, the joke is the 80s She-Ra, they really were made by the Barbie doll company, and they were all the same Barbie doll shape, color, traditional feminine beauty. Yeah, don't get me started. But this time, She-Ra is having fun with the, wow, Harry and Draco seem much more into each other than they do to all the girlfriends. Let's talk about that story. So basically that's the story they're telling with She-Ra. And in season, I don't know, 3 or something, we have a non-binary character who is politely referred to as they by everybody, and nobody goes, so tell me about being... No. Again, this is just everybody is accepted, from one of the heroes to gay dads to everyone's just accepted. So to show children this is what it could be like, you could just have a playground experience where everybody's nice to each other and everybody goes, okay, you look nice today, instead of tell me why you're like that. And it's just so sweet and charming. But for books, I do enjoy Cassandra Clare, who by now has like a billion of them. Very all-inclusive and friendly. And they were playing with the marriage metaphor you mentioned, as one of the more recent trilogies was spending all their time going, yes, I would like to marry you, but it's not legal yet because you're a shadow hunter and I'm a warlock, and according to the laws of your people, we could say the words and wear the nice outfits and then go on a honeymoon, but we can't legally be married, and I want to wait till the legal certificate comes in. And yes, they were both male, but the metaphor was not subtle. But they got their happy ending too, so it's a sweet series.
What about you, Charles? Do you have any examples of things that are out now that you're seeing more that you wouldn't have seen before?
Yes. I read a lot of short fiction, and I don't know that I would say that I see more now than in the recent past. There have been, the recent past has been fairly good. You can find typically a dozen or so stories a month that are published from fairly large places that have explicitly queer content. I'd say we're making a lot more progress when it comes to novellas and things like that. Thinking specifically about certain presses, Neon Hemlock has put out 4 novellas this year. All of them are very good, and all of them are very queer. You see some other works. R.B. Lemberg has the Fourth Profound Weaves, which is out in like a few days, like a week or two, and is absolutely amazing. And includes 2 trans elders who are going on this like very strange, epic journey, and it's just really like I haven't really seen that before. Tor's been doing a good job with like putting a lot of stuff out there. There's Finna from Nino Cyprian, which is amazing and hilarious, and there's just a lot of variety in what they're doing. So at the novella level, I'm like very impressed at a lot of what places are putting out there. Short fiction, I think, has been good for a while and continues to be just still like one of my favorite places to go to find content, because I don't read an awful lot of novels, in part because when I do, it's hard to find sort of like the messiness that I like. Either they tend to be like a little bit too grim, or they just somehow are cleaned up a bit in a way that I see complicated in shorter forms, and that I appreciate.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You can get a very different feel off of short fiction than you can from a novel. And I think it's easier to be able to sink into that because you're not locked into it for as many pages, really. So you can kind of dip into different worlds and get different tastes of things, which is really cool. Sarah, tell us about things that you're seeing. You're a YA librarian. I'm sure you're seeing a ton. What are some things that you're loving to see now? What are some things that you would recommend to a teen coming to your library looking for some awesome queer SFF stories?
So there is so much. It's so good. I don't have time to read it all, which is a lovely problem to have. Not technically YA, but I'm going to second Finna by Nino Cipri. I recently read it, and I've been, what with everything, I've been in a little bit of a reading slump. I've been having trouble focusing long enough to finish a novel length work, and it just like grabbed me and pulled me in, and I loved the story, but also I loved being able to have that feeling of just being absorbed in a story, which I hadn't had for a while. I saw that somebody on Discord maybe mentioned Shannon McGuire. I'm currently reading the latest in the Wayward Children series, which is really great for teens, especially teens who like love portal fantasy. It's so good. It's so queer. It's just, yeah, I love it. And let's see here, what else have I been reading recently? I've been kind of skipping around a little bit because of the aforementioned attention span issues. I've really loved Sawkill Girls by Claire Legrand. It's very queer, it's very feminist, it takes on a lot of the like girl chosen one Buffy related tropes in a way that just really is really deeply satisfying. And let's see here, what else? I got to read an advanced copy of Reverie by Ryan LaSala, which is a queer fantasy with a drag queen with magical powers as the antagonist, which like I was a little bit worried about how that was going to go off, I'm not going to lie, but I was really glad that I gave it a chance. It's very, it's again super queer, very very fluffy, while also dealing with actual serious topics with the gravity that they deserve, which is a hard balance to pull off. I'm trying to think of We Set the Dark on Fire by Taylor Maja. I think I'm probably horribly mispronouncing that, and I apologize, but I really loved that. It's kind of fantasy, kind of dystopia, polyamorous, queer. Let's see here. And the inheritance series by Melinda Lowe, which was actually my first time seeing an explicitly bisexual character in YA, and it's a little bit older, but I'm a big fan.
I love Melinda Lowe's work, so I will back up that recommendation. I noticed also in the chat that some people are reading right now The Prey of Gods by Nikki Drayden, which also has LGBT characters. And another backup recommendation for The Four Profound Weaves by R.B. Limburg, which is out in 2 weeks and which is amazing. I was lucky enough to read it ahead of time, because I got to give it a blurb, which was very exciting. I love it when people send me books because they know that I will love them and then ask me to tell other people how much I love them, because it's a win-win all around. But that one is great. Charles mentioned it. It has trans elders. A question that has come in is, how about pansexual characters explicitly? So I know that we've mentioned some things with bisexual characters. Are there any books or other mainstream media that you can think of that explicitly have pansexual characters? And I will start with Valerie. Oh, no, wait. I'm going to start with Charles because I saw Charles put his hand up.
So I think it's difficult to find works of any sort that will have explicit labels with that sort of thing, because now you're looking for, is it explicitly bisexual if it doesn't say bisexual? And very few works will even say bisexual. That's the thing I tend to use for myself, and I sometimes use them interchangeably despite people having different opinions or beliefs on that, which are completely valid. So I find that there aren't an awful lot that will say outright. You will find people who are attracted to all genders and or multiple genders and that sort of thing, and it exists. That exists, but like finding the actual tag, like someone who has said I am pansexual, is difficult. I have seen it. I cannot exactly remember where. Probably like 2 or 3 times over the past 3 years in short fiction, like explicitly stated. I would have to like see if I had tagged it specifically in my reviews to know what those stories are. But otherwise, there are like a range of stories that are about people who are some sort of attracted to multiple genders. We had talked about Fenna, which has a non-binary character, and there's lots of different kinds of attractions in that. There's a lot of things like that. That's, I guess, my 2 cents there.
Yeah, I think talking about labels is hard because, like you said, it's not always the case that characters in a story would naturally necessarily talk about themselves as being labeled. And I know that there are a lot of people out there who use bisexual to mean what some people who use pansexual as a label for themselves mean. I think I'm one of them because I grew up with bisexual as the first thing that I latched onto, and I've kept it, and I'm non-binary myself. So for me, if pressed, every time someone wants me to define it, what I say is bisexual for me means I'm attracted to people who share my gender or other genders, which could be many. So, but pan is not a label I've ever used for myself, and that's just kind of happenstance. I think that some of the stories that we have talked about as having bisexual characters would be also pan. But I think that we've also mentioned some things that have characters that would definitely fit that. And Valerie, I know you talked about Steven Universe a little bit. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Well, no. Steven Universe would be a great example. I've got a long list here of completely different ones to answer the question. I have not seen as much of Steven Universe as I should. To answer directly, Captain Jack Harkness. Because not just Captain Jack himself, who's awesome, but they say, oh yeah, he's from the 51st century where that's the culture. People aren't so hung up on I only date this group or only date that group. So that's one of the powers of sci-fi fantasy. So that's where I tend to see it. Like Holly Black's Fairy Kingdom, all the fairies just kind of go, yeah, boy one day, girl the next, whatever. We're not human. We don't have your hang-ups. Whoever, all good. So Elizabeth Bear has a lot, including in her series with the wolves. You end up with whoever your wolf likes, so it's complicated. But, somebody like Lucifer appears to go for anybody, as do his demon friends. So again, you get some of these fantasy cultures, alien cultures, spike on Buffy and vampire culture, just don't have our hangups.
Okay. Sarah, do you have any examples?
Yeah, and I think also as someone who generally identifies as bi, but also as a definition that most of the people who identify as pan would agree with. I mostly chose because I like the colors on the bi flag better, but it was also the first term that like really like seemed like me. I did have to I was like, I know I've seen them, but I couldn't remember. So I went Googling, because that is often my way of jogging my memory. Ship It by Britta London. I actually got to read Ship It when it was a screenplay that she was trying to shop. And it deals with fandom, and also the main character ends up in a relationship with someone who identifies as homo-romantic and pansexual. There's also Reverb by Anna Szabo, which is part of their rock romance series. And I have not read it, but Anna is a phenomenal author, so I have no qualms recommending it. And then there's also, let's see here. And then if you go and look at Book Riot, they have a lot of good recommendations for pansexual books, speculative or otherwise.
All right. I'm going to jump into some audience comments and questions now. Someone recommends The Books of Ruxura by Martha Wells, the same author who wrote the Murderbot Diaries. And it's based on a culture that doesn't have a concept of straight and plays a lot with gender and relationships in that universe. And they also mentioned that Martha Wells has a habit of always including some LGBT content, and that the T in that is not just incidental. It is often represented, though sometimes only by non-binary characters and not specifically transgender characters. But yeah, not just writing that acronym out without ever actually including the T, which I think is an issue that we have seen historically a lot. Is when you see people talk about LGBT fiction, they're really talking about the L and the G. Someone also mentioned Shauna McGuire, which I know Sarah talked about it a little bit earlier, and they said that her characters often cover the whole spectrum, including ace and trans. And I think we haven't talked about ace rep at all yet. I'd love to get into some ace and trans here in a minute. Someone recommends Jacqueline Koyanagi's Ascension as having a poly relationship as well as explicitly queer characters, and Cameron Hurley's epic fantasy, The Worldbreaker Saga, which has great gender fluid characters, so that's awesome. Also, one nation has 5 gender and the other has 3, so lots of different genders. Someone asks, what about intersectionality? So I feel like we're going to stop there with the audience questions and comments for now and come back to more later. But I would like to jump into some good recommendations for ace, trans, and intersectional queer characters. And I'm going to throw that to you first, Charles. I feel like you probably have some great recommendations.
So one source that I've been very much enjoying recently is Serial Box. Has serial projects and novels that I think have been doing a really great job with sort of like hitting a lot of intersectional points. The Vela, which came out last year by an incredible group of writers, has lots of trans rep, lots of intersectional parts in that, and it's really just a complex sort of space opera kind of deal, but like just really hammers at home notes of immigration and colonization and all of these sorts of things, climate change. It just really, that one specifically more recently.
Can you repeat the title of that one, please?
That's The Vela by River Solomon, Yoon-Ha Lee, Martha Wells, and SL. I forget. I might have gotten that wrong. Probably there's 4 authors, and they're coming out with a second season that's going to be a different group of writers, and I'm still very excited about because the storyline sort of ended abruptly, and I'm like, I want to know what happens. But more recently, Knox, also from Serial Box, which is sort of like a historical horror Lovecraftian sort of deal about a Puerto Rican woman who went to World War I and came back and is having these visions, and it's all sorts of messed up, and the horror aspects are really sharp, and it's just got an amazingly diverse and sharp cast. Again, if you want like intersection with queer stuff, there's some publications that I have found that like do a great job of it. Glittership publishes explicitly queer content like exclusively. They do podcasts, but they've been sort of doing standard issues recently that you can buy. Strange Horizons has done just a phenomenal job in this field for the last number of years and just keeps on getting better and better and better. There was like a really good story, which titled by, there was a story by Priya Sridhar earlier this year that was really good and Lovecraftian and sort of about therapy and queer, and it was really good. If you're not reading Faya, they normally do queer stories in each of their issues at least. I mean, it's not like tokenized at all, but it's like really good stuff that they're putting out, and like those are the places that I go to again and again that sort of don't disappoint.
I think the story you're talking about is The Oldest Solution. Is that the right one?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I was like, I remember this story. I'm just going to look it up really quickly. And if we're talking about Serial Box, I also want to plug Machina by Fran Wild, Curtis C. Chen, Martha Wells, and Malka Older. I think those are all the writers on that one. It's a sort of terraforming Mars interoffice space race, and one of the main characters is non-binary, and I loved reading a non-binary main character.
And I guess on the same, Nine Step Station is also really great, and one of the characters there is queer explicitly, like in a relationship with another woman, and the other character is probably aromantic, and that part of it's not like explicit yet. I'm waiting for them to get there, but it's very heavily implied, and it's just really, I've like most of the projects that I've read from Serial Box have been really good in that regard.
Okay, awesome. Valerie, do you want to give us some recommendations for intersectional, ace, trans, aromantic?
Intersectionality I've seen a lot lately because a lot of these teen series are trying to, I hate to say check multiple boxes, but you know, show us characters who have more than one thing going on, so many. But specifically for trans, I was really struck by Coagula, probably the first trans superhero, a member of Doom Patrol in the 90s, written by Rachel Pollack, who was trans, and she had some really great moments, although could be heavy-handed at times. And Rachel Pollack, likewise, her short stories are amazing, especially when you look at them as various kinds of metaphors and societal commentary. I just read the teen novel. I've been reading teen superhero fiction, yes. Dreadnought by April Daniels, trans, written by trans, is gorgeous, amazing, just sweet and touching and teenagery and kind. C.B. Lee wrote a whole superhero series called like Not Your Superhero, Not Your Sidekick, Not Your Villain in some order or other. Not Your Sidekick, I believe, is the trans character. And that's another one where everybody is just accepted and liked, and yeah, this person's this way and this person's that way, as opposed to asking all the pushy questions. Every Heart a Doorway by Shannon McGuire, which I think we alluded to, had a character who specifically specifies as asexual. And a final fascinating one was Every Day by David Levithan, because that one is, well, it's like Left Hand of Darkness or something where it's all metaphor. This is a character who every day wakes up in the body of a different teenager of the exact right age, 16 or 17 or whatever, living in the same community. So is, boy one day, girl the next. And the plot happens when this character falls in love and is trying to make it work while being jolted around all the bodies. So that one was just fascinating.
Great. And Sarah, do you want to give us some recommendations? I'd especially love to hear more ACE recommendations since we have Shauna McGuire, but we haven't really heard a lot of other ones.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad that Valerie mentioned Every Heart a Doorway, because it is very intersectional. The whole series is. It has ace rep. It also has a major trans character, a gender non-conforming, possibly non-binary character who uses she/her pronouns, but consistently presents more masculinely. So for ace rep, we're actually getting a lot recently in YA, and by a lot, I mean it's still a very small percentage, but it's much more than we have been getting. In Once and Future by Amy Rose Capetta and Corey McCarthy, which is a sci-fi fantasy mashup Arthurian retelling. There is an asexual knight, and then let's see here. Where is my list of stuff that I was pulling up? One that I haven't read, but is also by Amy Rose Capetta, is The Lost Coast, which features a non-binary gray ace character. One of the main characters in Sawkill Girls, which I referenced earlier, is ace, and it's actually something that she struggles with a little bit through the course of the story, because she is not aromantic, but she has zero sexual attraction. Let's see here. What else was there is a non-explicit, because of the historical setting, ace main side character in Dread Nation by Justina Ireland. And then excuse me, and Valerie mentioned the CB Lee Sidekick Squad series, which does include ace representation as well. There's also an ace retelling of The Little Mermaid, Seafoam and Silence by Lynn O'Connor. Let's see here. A lot of the ace stuff is contemporary, but there is stuff out there, and there's more and more all the time. There was another sci-fi one. Sorry, I'm scrolling through. Whole Metal Girls by Emily Skrutsky is sci-fi, and one of the main characters is ace and a romantic.
All right, those are some awesome recommendations. For other kinds of intersectionality, I would love to recommend the short stories of Innocent Chizaram Ilo, who is a Nigerian writer and writes just beautiful, wondrous, ethereal stories, which often include different kinds of queer characters. I edited one for the Cast of Wonders Band Book Weeks showcase last year, which was set in Nigeria and explicitly queer, and also just a really touching story. He just writes a lot of things. He's kind of breaking out. So if you search his name, it's Innocent Chizaram, Chizaram, Ilo, ILO. And he's kind of being published all over the place now. I think we'll see more of him in the future as well. But that's a really good intersectional author. Someone earlier mentioned Rivers Solomon. I think it was Charles. And Rivers writes also amazing intersectional works. There are so many authors writing really good intersectionality. And I feel like that is important because I don't think any of us are just one axis of our identity. So like, for instance, I'm half Mexican and bisexual and non-binary. So those are different things, but they're all part of me. So I think getting to see characters that are, I know that Valerie used the phrase checking off boxes, and I think that's a thing that we can fall into the idea of thinking. But I think for me, what's more exciting is to see people remembering that other humans are complex and not one-dimensional. And so seeing characters that do have different aspects of intersectionality is just a reflection of the vast array of humanity that's out there already, which is awesome. Okay, we are close to ending, so I'm going to skim through the audience questions really quickly. Salt roads, because it's mentioned in another panel before this. And then there's a question about whether there's a tendency to other queer characters by making them all green or AIs. I feel like that has been historically a thing, but right now we're talking about things that we love, and a lot of the examples we've given are definitely not that, so I'm not going to jump into that question. I think that's more for a problems with queer spec panel. Banner of the Damned by Sherwood Smith has an ace protagonist. Oh, great. And I think narrator. Question, what about aromantic characters? I think Charles did mention one of those. Melissa Scott's books are all LGBTQ. Someone also says the Villa. Let's see, Cordwainer Smith, Lord Justicost has an absolute passion for justice. So perhaps not actually for sexuality. The Broken Earth trilogy has a trans character and a poly relationship. That is N.K. Jemisin. Someone spelled out Innocent Chizaram Elo for me. Thank you. Roland Green's space opera series Star Cruiser Shenandoah has an ensemble cast with some cishet, some bi, some lesbian, some gay, and general perspective was some people could choose roommates of the interesting sex, whatever that is. Okay. So yeah, lots of really good thoughts. We are about to wrap up. We have 4 minutes left, and I would like to end by having all of the panelists recommend one work that you love, that you think people should go out and pick up right now and just pitch us on it. And I'm going to start with you, Charles. Go for it.
Birdverse, R.B. Lemberg. It's actually more than one work, so I'm cheating. I am so desperate for there to be longer works on this. I want everyone to go out and buy The Four Profound Weaves, which is out on the 3rd, I believe, of September. And just to catch up on, if we're talking intersectionality, there's trans characters, disabled characters, multilingual characters, all sorts of things in this, and normally multiple of all of them. Autistic characters, it's just a beautiful setting. And R.B. Lemberg has done such amazing work, like across different parts of it. It's not one storyline, it's one setting. And I sort of like compared it to a tapestry where you can sort of let your eye wander to wherever the things are, and it all exists at once. And it's just so amazing, and I want more of it. So go out and read as much and demand that publishers publish more of it, please.
Valerie?
Leaving behind YA, why not? Elizabeth Bear's Ink and Steel and Heaven and Earth are Christopher Marlowe was stolen by the fairies, Will Shakespeare goes to get him, they fall in love, they have to rescue each other quite a lot more, and it was just gorgeous writing.
All right. And Sarah?
I am struggling because I am a bisexual Gemini, and you asked me to choose one thing. Like, this is targeted harassment, and I don't have to take it. Let's see here. I'm trying to think. I actually did like a summer author visit series with a variety of amazing authors of color, some of whom are queer, some of whom are not. And I would actually recommend, if you have any middle grade or upper elementary age children in your life, that you go out and buy for them Ghost Squad by Claribel Ortega. Claribel is an amazing author. She is Dominican American. I believe that she is still using she pronouns. She is Dominican American. She is non-binary, and she has created this amazing, like, supernatural ghost story about a girl whose family live in the tree in her backyard, and everybody else sees them as fireflies, but she can see them and interact with them. And so she has this rich extended family, but when they're gone, she has to figure out how to get them back while also saving her father's business and dealing with a looming supernatural disaster. It is excellently written. It is beautifully illustrated on the cover, and there is a very important cat character.
Awesome. Okay, we are out of time. Panelists, if you wouldn't mind hopping into the Discord, into Scioto Room Odd, and putting your last recommendations there so people can see them. Thank you so much for attending, and thanks, panelists, for being here.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Amazing chat, people.